All right, the ceremonial face making for the thumbnails, please. And let's start with Luca Doncic's decision to try to reach in on Jaylen Brown in transition with 5 fouls. Should I just do the podcast like this?
I mean, you can if you want.
I might have to look at my screen.
Derek White's passing at some key moments in the first and second halves.
Oh, the fact that Luka Doncic is not at his best right now, physically. Oh, that was actually like pretty similar for us.
Yeah.
Terrifying. All right, let me just do a little tweet out here and then we can get rolling. The Boston Celtics looked like they might blow it for a second there, but they held on in a game that they largely outplayed the Dallas Mavericks pretty significantly to take a 3-0 lead in the NBA Finals in the absence of Kristaps Porzingis. Their defensive strategy still worked quite well, and they got just enough offense at the end of the game to pull it out, and in all likelihood will take banner number, is it 18? It is 18, right?
I believe it's 18, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to look that up by Friday.
But so yeah, what was your big impressions here?
This was a blowout in a close game's clothing. And yeah. I'm not necessarily focused as much on the Dallas had this hot start. They went up. I believe the margin was 25-12, but it was also 22-9. So it was 13 twice. And that all counts, all that. But that was Kyrie being really hot. Luca had a really strong moment, just like he did at the beginning of game 2, after he had the pain-killing injection, as reported. And then after that, Boston settled in. The defense looked fantastic. And I think that's the story to me of game 3, is that even without Kristaps Porzingis, the Dallas Mavericks, other than this wild stretch of the fourth that we will discuss, they cannot score sufficiently on the Boston Celtics to be competitive as they need to be in this series.
And again, Dallas maybe could have won this game. They themselves were competitive for all the game other than the third quarter, much like in game 1 where it was the first quarter that did them in. But yeah, except for that stretch right at the end, which I view as aberrational. And they're up 3-0, so it's not going to matter whether it's an aberration or not at this point. Boston's going to win the series. And we could talk about why that was aberrational. But yeah, Dallas just was not able to play their game. They're not generating the corner threes. They had to go to God. They just had to try a bunch of different stuff that they wouldn't normally do because they just weren't generating the offense. They had to play Tim Hardaway Jr. a bunch, for example.
They didn't have to. They chose to.
Fair enough. But they just were not really able to generate that many threes for their role players. And then Doncic and Irving, I thought, like Dallas's defense was good enough in the fourth, although again, Boston's offensive process I thought was miserable most of the way through the fourth. They had 91 points like 2 minutes into the fourth, so it's not like Dallas's defense was so awesome in this game. Boston is really embarrassed Luka Doncic in particular defensively in this series, but I thought that they got that cold stretch from Boston. And Luca just didn't have enough. And I would say it's been true probably mostly in the series, but in particular in this game, this was the game where you really saw physically all the stuff that he was dealing with manifests itself, because he is usually, when Luca has a bad game, he's missing outside shots, the step back isn't working, etc. Like, he was getting to spots, he was getting to his looks, and he was short on a lot of them. He just could not make those short range shots that I as labeled him as the second best floater shooter in the NBA besides Nikola Jokic. He just was not able to make those shots. I thought they did a pretty good job actually getting him some of those, and it didn't work. None more salient than the one where it's 93-90 and he misses another one of those little hook shot floaters short, and then would foul out shortly thereafter.
And I mean, one stat on this is that Luca 9 of 18 on shots in the paint. And I don't think any of those were blocked. I don't recall any of them being blocked. And then, there were some that were well contested, but he makes those at a higher rate. And it was 50% from both restricted area 4 of 8 and from the upper paint, which was 5 of 10. And yeah, I mean, it is a clear limitation for Doncic. And I thought it was surprising that the Mavericks removed the injury, like kind of the notices for everything other than the thoracic issue. But he still looks limited with the knee, everything else. But another through line, which is a parallel with game 2 and game 3, is that Doncic looked significantly better in the first half, specifically the first quarter, than the second. And that makes complete sense when you're dealing with a pain-killing injection. So Luca, he was 5 of 9 from the field in that first quarter, and then he was 6 of 18 in the rest of the game.
Yeah, and that thoracic contusion is like that's something that we've seen guys like Jared Allen, and that's not necessarily like the rib. This is maybe more sternum area potentially, but it still is difficult. And if you're getting the injection, then he pretty clearly needs that to play, and that can just wear off over the course of a 3-hour game, and you can't just like get another injection, as far as I know. I mean, whenever I've heard this talked about, it's discussed in the okay, like you get one and then it kind of wears off by the end. And certainly if you've got like this chest contusion, kind of getting your arm up above your head on like a floater or whatever, extending your body, like that's, you're going to maybe feel a little something in your chest as you try to go up, and that's going to lead you to short arm it a little bit. And the Celtics play great defense too. Like Xavier Tillman, they blocked him a couple times, but Luca, like, he doesn't get those shots blocked. Like, it just doesn't happen to him, no matter who's defending him. When he gets to a spot, he can pump fake, he can use his body to finish. So again, this isn't making an excuse. The Celtics are completely without Kristaps Porzingis, and he was a massive part of their team, of course. But yeah, and maybe this is part of the Celtics strategy, though they skew this way anyway, to not really double team Luca too much. And again, they also do show a lot of help, but they don't just like straight double team. And yeah, Luca just not good enough to beat them. Kyrie was close, but just couldn't get enough threes off. He needed to go completely crazy for the whole game, and he only did it for maybe about the first 18 minutes or so. And yeah, I mean, again, not getting to 100 points for the Mavericks, and they only got close because of like the crazy Celtic, I guess, strategy in the fourth quarter.
And I want to talk a little bit about Kyrie Irving, because and you brought this up during the live show, but something that was really striking is that Irving was 4 of 5 from 3 in the first half, including a big 3 of 3 in that second quarter when the Mavericks held it even and they had a 1-point lead at halftime. Kyrie Irving only attempted 1 3-pointer in the entire second half. And so that showed some of the approach. And Irving, he did do a better job in terms of process. First of all, this was not only his best game of the series, but his first positive game of the series. And he did a better job understanding what Boston was conceding, but then Boston did a better job executing on Irving in the second half. And so he wasn't as big a part of that flurry towards the end. And why this in many ways was such a deflating game for the Mavericks, even if they had won, which would have been a surprising win, the comeback and everything else, was it took Irving having a huge game and Luca he had a big first half or big first quarter, we talked about before, to even like have the offense come up and stuff. Like, so they have this big Kyrie game, they have the Luca stuff, and they still have an 87.5 first shot half court offensive rating. And it's not like they were unbelievable in the other fact. They had a 200 offensive rating in transition. So like per cleaning the glass. So like it's even there in this series, and a lot of this credit goes to the Celtics. And like I don't want this to be phrased entirely as like the Mavericks suck or they're bad or Luca's hurt or anything like that. Boston is an exceedingly good defensive team doing really good stuff. But Dallas's offense just hasn't been good enough to give them a fighting chance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it was really transition both during the run in the fourth quarter and in the first that got them really most of their points. I mean, outside of those two runs, the offense was utterly anemic, and most of that was via feedback loops, kind of bad shots by Celtics, misses. And then when the Celtics weren't able to get into their shell defensively, maybe got some more cross matches, they got a little bit of pace, breaking the paint. That's when Dallas was able to actually look decent offensively, but really the only times in the end that they were. And once Boston kind of cleaned things up a little bit, like we got asked early on, like as Dallas is waltzing to the rim early in the game, well, is this a new strategy from Boston? And I do think that they didn't quite give as much help as, say, they did in the second half when you would have the screen, the switch, and then the guy guarding the screener who was rolling away would just kind of still hang out at the free throw line. They weren't doing that as much. But part of the reason they weren't getting as much help was they just weren't matched up very well in transition. It was just a more chaotic situation. I did think Dallas did some nice things offensively, whether just to try to get more open side stuff. And as much as you can say that you should bring help, you do have to like still come across the lane. The lane is still 16 feet wide in the NBA because you can't just camp out in the lane the whole time. And so they were able to get, I thought, some pretty decent looks open side. Boston probably could have been more aggressive coming over on the strong side and helping on those plays, particularly early. And I thought getting Luca in the post in the second half, like they were getting good looks out of that. Luca just not able to really convert. And yeah, in the end, I mean, just particularly in the absence of Porzingis, for Dallas to go only 15 to 26 at the rim. And keep in mind, too, the Celtics big man has switched out on the perimeter a lot, too. So only to go 15 to 26 at the rim and then shoot pretty poorly in the upper paint.
Oh, I mean, 11 of 28. Well. Yeah, that's pretty ghastly. So overall, yeah. Boston.
And those shots are coming from Luca Doncic and Kyrie Irving, who are both supposed to be masters from that range.
Right. And it's been a weird series for like Irving has missed shots that he normally makes. He was 6 of 14 in the upper paint, 1 of 4 in the restricted area. In this one, that definitely stood out to me. And then another thing that was, you brought up that a lot of the Mavericks fourth quarter run was in transition, was you noticed the presence of the clean looks for PJ Washington and Josh Green and Tim Hardaway Jr., who missed all of them, in that fourth quarter run, because they hadn't existed for the rest of this series. I mean, it's been a repeated theme for us overall in these NBA finals on how not only is it, I mean, a lot of times we've been focused on the makes for the law firm of Washington, Jones, Exum, and Green, but it's also the attempt rate other than in that fourth quarter where, like, I mean, so through the first 3 quarters of game 3, Jones, Washington, Exum, and Hardaway Jr., they combined for 5 3-point attempts. That's it. 5. And you know that if they're open and they're getting them, that they're going to take, like, they weren't turning them down. They just didn't exist.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it was like, these are Doncic and Irving are getting into the paint. Like, these are, it's not like they're forcing them into like contested mid rangers. Those guys shot a combined 36 shots in the paint between them. They're 5 of 12 at the rim, and Boston just did a really good job of contesting. I thought Tillman was so key in that regard. He made a lot of plays where guys tried to take him one-on-one. He stayed with them, and he's got a really long wingspan, and he really bothered him. He stopped Doncic a couple of times. He stopped Irving one time. So that was key. And that's, I would also say, Joe Mazzulla, great decision. Tillman really hasn't been featured much in these playoffs. For him to get that first look at center off the bench, despite how limited he is on the offensive end, he did hit a corner 3 that looked pretty rickety, but it did go in as they're making their run in the third. But that was a good job by Mazzulla. And that's actually someone I want to talk about is Joe, he did have a really good timeout in the third when it gets down to 6, and then that's when they go on the run to that wouldn't end until they were up by 21. And then he probably waited 2 possessions too long, I thought, to take the timeout as Dallas is making their run, and going 11-0 ended up being 17-2 in the end. But other than that one foible, I think he has coached a great series. Their strategy has been amazing. They haven't had hardly any miscommunications. Just the fact that they've played this way all year, that they have just great communication. Yeah, you've got a lot of vets, a lot of guys who have been around in this group, but this is a new group integrating some new pieces. The way that they've completely short-circuited the pick and roll game, even when Porzingis was in, by just keeping him out of the action and just not letting Dallas try to go at him very well. Like they do so much communication to allow that to happen. And the way he's been very defined about, no, we're a 3-point shooting team. We're a 5-out team. We're going to keep shooting. We're going to try to get more of them off a drive and kick and not settle. But like, that's what we do. If we take 60% of our shots from 3, like they did in the first half, we're totally fine with that. That's who we are. That's who we do. We're leaning into that. We're going to have confidence in that. I think they weren't challenged that much in the first 3 rounds. And I think people were like thinking he was doing a bad job or something. Even as they still only lost 2 of those games. But I think in this series, especially when you see some of the other great defenses that struggled against this Dallas offense and what Boston's been able to do to them, he deserves a ton of credit.
He does. And Boston does have fantastic personnel, and they have fantastic personnel to slow down Dallas's approach and to be able to slow them down without having to sacrifice the open shots for other players that Oklahoma City did, for example. And you and I criticized some of what Mark Daigneault did, but Boston's personnel is also better than OKC's in these specific elements. And yeah, I agree with you. Mazzulla has done an extremely good job overall in this series. I have my issues with this fourth quarter, but he's done a nice job. And I echo your praise with Tillman, where Tillman extremely offensively limited. And we saw Dallas at times, I thought in the third quarter in particular, they did a better job like exploiting that, like understanding that Tillman is limited. And I mean, we don't know how much they prepped for that, considering you and I didn't know, first of all, that Porzingis wasn't going to play until about like an hour or 2 before the game. Then who was going to be the backup center. So getting your legs above under you tactically for a player who hadn't participated in the entire series before, I'm sympathetic there. And Tillman only played 11 minutes in the whole game, but his defense was a huge positive. I was really happy to see him on the floor. And it's another example. First of all, he's a very good defender. That's not surprising to see him play good defense, but also the reminder that styles makes fights is one way of thinking about it, but that players on offense and on defense, their specific strengths and weaknesses lend themselves to certain situations. And so Tillman moves his feet pretty well. He's also extremely strong. And those are core attributes for defending Luca Doncic. And like Horford, I thought he did a nice job at times in this game as well. And so understanding that the strategic imperative is slowing down Luca Doncic, and you could do that through switching or a few other things, but like picking the right guy, it wasn't an obvious choice, but it was the right choice.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And yeah, he was really good. Like, he does know how to play winning basketball. He's not going to make mistakes. Offensively for Boston, Horford. Yeah, sorry.
I actually have a place I want to go for the offense because it's
we
didn't talk. It's one of those things that when we're doing a broadcast, you can't necessarily think about it. But the bizarre tale of 2 halves for the highest profile players for the Celtics. So Jason Tatum he had a very big first half as Boston is scrambling to get back in the game, and eventually it was nip and tuck at the end of the first half. 20 points, 7 of 15 from the field, hit some big threes, 3 of 6 overall, had a couple of assists, though the ball wasn't in his hands as much as a creator. And then Tatum, he's much less of a factor. I mean, he only took a few shots. He was 3 of 6 in the third, and then he was 1 of 5 in the fourth quarter. But the person who took his mantle was Jaylen Brown. So Jaylen Brown only took 6 shots in the entire first half, and he took 3 free throws as well. So he 2 of 6 from the field, 6 points, kind of floating along, had a couple of bad turnovers. And then Brown has this 15-point third quarter 6 and 9 from the field, has some really nice finishes, a part of what's kind of as they start building that lead. And then so he has in the second half. So Tatum had 20 in the first half. Brown has 24 in the second half when Tatum only has 11 on 4 of 11 from the field.
Brown also a career playoff high 8 assists in this one. That was his playoff high. He's had, I think he had 7 in the last game too, if memory serves. Tatum had 12. They had a total of 19, which you found was the most they'd had combined in a game. And so, like, those guys have passed the ball a lot better. They've made, they haven't been perfect. They definitely have had plays where they try to go one-on-one. Some of the times, though, they could still actually make those shots, right? Like, probably the biggest shot of the game was a Jaylen Brown contested mid-ranger off just a crap offensive possession. But they've done enough to really, like, get the churn going, set up enough of these other guys for three-pointers with the 5-out spacing, tire out the Dallas Mavericks, make them rotate. Like, that's another thing that Luca just can't do is rotate at all. And they really, as I noted again, they really took advantage of him quite a bit. And so, yeah, I thought Brown in the second half was fantastic. He had that huge dunk as well, where they took advantage of Irving and then Doncic as like the screener defender right at the end of the third. That was fantastic. And of course, he's played great defense. He drew the last 2 fouls on Luca as well in quick succession.
Should we talk about that? Should we talk about that briefly now? Because we're sure it's going to be a point of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, very briefly because they were both fouls.
Yep.
And the second one was just an asinine decision by Luca, and you could tell, like, it really kind of played into all his worst impulses. This is something we talked about on the live show as well, is that when you're tired, and then even more so if, like, you're hurting as well, it just can take an effect mentally to where you're a little more out of it. You're a little prone to mental mistakes. And so Doncic, the first thing that he always would have wanted to do would be to take a transition take foul. Okay, well, that's been you can't do that anymore. But then he's like, okay, well, then I'll reach in and kind of give a foul. Like, oh, wait, no, never mind. I can't do that. I am in foul trouble. I will foul out if I do it. But then by the time he realizes that, so if you watch the replay, you see him reach his hand over and you can see he's like, oh, I'll try to go for the steal if I foul him. Who cares? And then he's like, oh, shit, no, I got to pull my hand back. And by that point, he was moving into his path and committed the blocking foul.
And remember, this is a super, super duper star player with 5 fouls at the time, with 4:12 remaining in the finals game that basically was the last chance for them to win the championship this year. And you can't do that. And remember, he committed a frustration foul on Derek White earlier in the game. You can't commit frustration fouls if you're this important and commit fouls in bunches. It's unconscionable. And Luca, I understand that players are human beings, and he was on tilt with the refs almost this entire game. Some of the no calls, I was sympathetic to Doncic on, where it was like they were letting a lot of contact go and contact issues that he did. But you also have to recalibrate and understand that, first of all, your complaining doesn't help. And that once Mark Davis and his crew established a level, I thought they were pretty consistent. Like they and it's not to say that like Dallas got a rough whistle. Dallas committed 2 egregious fouls in transition on what should have been and ones that weren't called, and I have zero idea how neither one of them was called. It's just like, I guess maybe they missed the contact. Like Exum hacked Jaylen Brown once, and then Jason Tatum got drilled twice, I think, on and one dunks that they just never called the foul. So Dallas, I mean, Luca, sure, there are a few plays that he thought were fouls that were not, but like there are kind of 2 segments of this. One is like the being frustrated with the calls that you're not getting, and the, if you want to call it immaturity, even though Luca's much older now than when he came into the league. But it's also, I've criticized Steph Curry for this. I've criticized Jokic for this at different moments of time. It's, don't commit stupid frustration fouls if you commit fouls in bunches and you are that important to your team. In games like this, you can't survive that as the Mavericks.
Yeah, and there are a few times, he goes flying in the cameras, he doesn't get back on defense. They kind of got bailed out on a couple of those by like the Horford travel, for example. And there's like, he got fouled on one by Tatum, where Tatum, the old off arm, gave him a shove. He should have gotten that call. But also, if you save it, then on the crazy ones, you can at least like protest a lot, and the referee will know that they actually did you wrong, and then maybe that gets in their head the next time. If you complain on everyone, then the referee is never going to know that they're wrong. Speaking of the referees being wrong, though, again, we saw the play where the guy gets fouled, loses the ball out of bounds, and then they challenge it. Derek White actually told Joe Mazzulla to challenge it because he saw that Jrue Holiday fouled Luca and never actually hit the ball, so they knew that they were going to win that challenge, which, I mean, they have to adopt the WNBA rule. It's just completely ridiculous they haven't, where they don't actually call a foul, but they do at least give the ball to the team that was fouled when the foul causes them to lose possession out of bounds. That's just such an obvious low-hanging fruit move. It's shocking to me they haven't done that yet.
And plenty with this and the one in the conference finals, plenty of high-profile evidence to go that direction. And if you wanted to go even more extreme that you can call that foul, then you could go there. But I think the WNBA policy on it is totally reasonable enough. Also, we got another example with that Luca Derek White thing, if that they need to adjust the interpretation of the transition take foul. You and I have harped on that all year. Incidentally, even though he only was credited with 4 assists, I thought that per unit volume, the best passer for the Celtics was Derek White. He had 4 assists. 3 of them are so good they're in my notes as specifically good passes. There was a huge one in the fourth quarter to Tatum that helped seal the win, but then he had 2 massive...
they were topsiding Tatum to prevent him from coming up to go get the ball, and so White just like whistles this pass right by the defender's ear to get him the ball at the free throw line, and Tatum goes in for a dunk. That was one of the best passes we've seen in these finals.
And then he had 2 really good passes in the early third quarter as Boston was kind of establishing their lead. We were discussing at the time that was like a nightmare stretch for the Mavs, and he was finding open guys. And part of the beauty of the Celtics, and I give Stevens a lot of credit, and I give the players a lot of credit here too, is that Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Jrue Holiday, Jason Tatum, none of those guys really fit the bill as a go-to offensive engine in the way that either Luca Doncic or Kyrie Irving has qualified either now or at other points in their careers. But because of their overall spacing and because of their overall competence, they get enough from those guys. And there are points, I mean, you brought it up today too, and I echoed it, is that like Jrue Holiday can do a lot of that stuff, and it's also so much easier for Jrue now than it was before, not because he has the ball in his hand so much less, but because teams have to defend so much more area that he can attack one-on-one. He's generally facing the other team's like third best or fourth best defender. And so they're putting these players who, in part why their value was maybe a little low around the league, why they were able to get Derek White, is that there are these things that they can't do. And while one of the ways to make those players sing is to have them play next to a Luka Doncic, another way to do it is to just have this level of quality personnel where they can find their spots, but you don't have to lean on them too heavily.
Let's see. What else can we talk about? Celtics got up 18 corner threes in this game. 7 of 18. They were 2 of 10 from the left corner and 5 of 8 from the right corner. Again, just an indication of the health of their offense.
Well,
Mavs
and
got up 5, which was like a lot for them.
Yeah, it was the Boston Celtics took more shots from each corner than the Mavs took total. And when you think back to the Oklahoma City series and everything else, that may feel alien to you, but the reason why is because Boston is conceding different things than the Thunder did and everyone else. And another important player in a game, I mean, as I said, this is a blowout in a close game's clothing. After 0 for 5 in game 2, Sam Hauser, I thought he had a very nice overall performance. 3 of 4 from 3, sure, but I thought he competed on defense. And there was a point when Luca tried to attack him that didn't go super well. And so Hauser, he's more stout than you think. I don't think that he's stable enough there that on a different team that you trust him as a starter defensively, but he can execute. He is not a weak point like some other players around the league are.
No, I thought he was actually a plus at times in this game. Again, maybe with Luca not at his absolute best, but yeah, he held up totally fine, as Jrue Holiday would say. Even our white guys guard. Pritchard had a couple of struggles right at the start of the run for the Mavs. Should we talk about that?
Yes, I
think it's probably time.
I think we should. And so the short version of it is that what happened is Boston goes on this huge run, and they go up 21, or was it 22?
21.
It was 21. And at basically that exact moment, you could see the sea change in Boston's offensive and defensive approach. And what was so stunning about it was how early it came in the game. Because so they got these 2 3-pointers, Jaylen Brown and then Derek White, 91-70. And almost like as like a light switch, then they started clog toilet offense, and they started changing
timeout by the Mavs. So you do feel like maybe there was a strategic change. I don't know if they changed their strategy or not, but given the way that Joe Mazzulla, it seems like. We'll talk more about that, I guess. But yeah.
No, so go ahead.
Well, I think we see Mazzulla like very indexed on analytics stuff at the end of the game, including trying to foul up 6 with the shot clock off in this game, as he did in the Pacers series, and then also kind of going again to the clogged toilet offense. And we talked about it after game 2. The Mavs did kind of come back into it a little bit there, but you're like, with 3 minutes left, I think it's more defensible, because then the Mavs, it's like, all right, if we literally just hold the ball for 24 seconds and make them come back down on us without turning it over, and we don't give up any threes, it would be like nearly impossible for us to lose. But you extrapolate that out over a 10-minute period, up 20, and it starts to get worse as well. And I think, if that indeed is what it was, I'd maybe follow up and try to figure out if they really did change their strategy to just allow more and easier twos, and also just run the shot clock down more than they had before.
There's another part of it. I mean, so Boston's offense, to me, they were getting into things more slowly. So the start of that, so that means you have a smaller window to generate an advantage, whatever that advantage is. But then the other thing that they weren't doing, and this is like the kind of the logical, if you're taking that to the logical extreme, is they weren't getting back sufficiently in transition defense. And so Dallas is if you're going to this approach, the thing you can't give up are feedback loops, because then you're not getting the benefit on the back end. You have to have both the slowing down on offense and the making shots hard on defense. They were failing on kind of both of those fronts. And so then Dallas, they're getting to a rhythm. I brought up that was the point, in that fourth quarter, I only have the stats for the full run. Just on terms of the attempts, PJ Washington, 4 3-pointers. Josh Green, 1 3-pointer. Tim Hardaway Jr., 1 3-pointer. They were generating those shots, which they did not in the entire rest of the game. Much of that was in transition, but also there was just a lack of crispness overall in Boston's defense. And that makes sense when you're like that sort of approach and it's what happened, whether it was dictated by Mazzulla and the staff or not. It justifiably kind of deactivates you a little bit. And so I understood it from a human perspective, and I hated it from an analyst perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're just taking the air out of the ball on offense like that, almost, and then you're also not pushing the ball up as well, right? That just, it takes any sort of alacrity out of your motions. And then you're you're much more likely to be missing. And there's just a natural relaxation when you're not just present. We're driving, we're kicking, we're really engaged. And then all of a sudden it's oh, now you got to get into max effort after you've just been standing around, when that's not normally your game. And I didn't watch all of their just crazy blown leads this season, but I think as much as you can do if you're Boston to just continue to play the game that got you here in these situations, I think that would just be better, because they have really struggled in them. So it's not going to end up mattering, but it's also just that was part of the story of this game, is how Dallas came back. So Richard says, it feels too nitpicky for a top 15 team in NBA history, which we'll talk about that. Don't worry. When that happens, we will talk about that. But
I mean, I think it's also part of the story of this team. They are really, really good, but they also have been prone to these.
Well, we're just talking about the story of this game. People someone was like, hey, what did I miss in the game? That's the purpose of this podcast, is to just tell you about what happened in this game. So that is something that happened.
Something else that we saw, especially as it was in game 2, in the early part, was Luca Doncic specifically going aggressively after Jason Tatum in one-on-one defense. And hilariously, the Mavs, it kind of coincided that they went to it a little bit less when, for a brief time in the second quarter, Mazzulla actually made that the default matchup. It seemed like that isn't necessarily why there was a stretch. That's where Luca went after Hauser and everything else. But Jason Tatum hasn't been great one-on-one defense against Luca Doncic. Luca's a brutally hard guy to defend, and I thought Tatum did a better job as a help defender in Game 3 than he did in Game 2. But it's a reminder that he's a good player, but he has some limitations.
Yeah, and I didn't think he really defended too badly in those stretches, and he also completely kept them in it and got them back into it when they were down 13.
Oh yeah,
in the first by actually hitting some of those difficult threes. And I thought I was wrong. I was like, okay, they're without Porzingis, like they are going to have to hit some more of these tough shots throughout most of the game. That wasn't necessarily the case until Braun hit a couple late. But Tatum, yeah, with his drives, I mean, the fact that he's been able to get by guys, even like Lively, as much as he has been, on even PJ Washington, obviously Luca, in a way that just a lot of times Luca's actually held up okay in isolation defense. I always thought those numbers were massively overrated. And of course, I'm sure the injury and fatigue, it doesn't help there too at this point in the playoffs. But like the fact that anytime Doncic has been on Tatum, he's just instantly cooked him when he's tried to drive, I think has been pretty big and not something I would say everyone saw coming. I also think that the Mavs, I haven't liked their strategy on Tatum and Brown. I think Lively got a little better with it, of just trying to back off, contain, and make those guys shoot threes off the dribble where neither of them are particularly efficient, as opposed to letting them drive, particularly Lively. Like, he shouldn't be pressuring up. There was another crazy play as they're making their run where Josh Green is guarding Tatum, and they've run down the whole shot clock. There's like 5 left on the shot clock. And all of a sudden, Josh Green just for some reason opens up his stance and just like lets Jason Tatum drive right to the basket. I think he got fouled on that play. That was a little odd. I guess you should talk about the fact that Porzingis didn't play, huh?
Sure. And I mean, this does not, I mean, we talked about the injury at length on Tuesday once we got the actual diagnosis from the Celtics. And to me, my first read, like when we found out that he was going to play, is that does not bode well for his availability the rest of the series. Now, Boston is up 3-0, so that is presumably less impactful. We've, of course, never seen a team come back from an 0-3 deficit. And it's, because the idea is there isn't an underlying, with a tear here, there isn't an underlying thing like maybe swelling or something else to improve that would make it more likely for him to play in the future.
It could be swollen. I'm not sure about that.
It could, but like as a general, as a general construct, like that's how I feel.
It's not the injury itself will not be healed at any point during this series. Is what you're saying.
And so we saw Joe Mazzulla lean more heavily on Al Horford. Al Horford played 37 minutes in Game 3, but also Xavier Tillman, 11. I thought he was good when he was on the floor, did the stuff we talked about defensively. And even if the offensive limitations were more of a part of the third quarter, they were still definitely good enough. The Celtics outscored the Mavericks by 9 in Tillman's 11 minutes. So yeah, Porzingis' absence was significant, and Boston's offense was, of course, less dynamic with him unavailable. So do you have more on Porzingis, or is that's kind of?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it seems most likely that he would just be done for the series. And, another comment that we had was like, well, hey, if it's too bad that the Celtics won this one, because then we would have had a series. And that's kind of how I felt on the surface. But given the way it played out for the Mavs offense, and yeah, there's also a comment which I agree with, that maybe the Mavs can do a better job of exploiting some of Tillman's limitations on the defensive end, but not amazing. Like, you still have 4 really good shooters around him, right? It's not like it's impossible to score if you don't have like perfect 5-out spacing. That just really causes the most problems for the Mavs, who are so reliant on having a rim protector. But I mean, the way that they defended anyway without Porzingis, where they hadn't been as good without him in the first couple of games, I think that shows that they would have been fine in the series, even if they lost this one, unless like nothing would have happened in this game, even if the Mavs had a crazy comeback, to make me think, okay, shit's changed in this series. Like, something fundamental has changed. Now, okay, maybe something mentally could happen that would be a fundamental change, but I wouldn't be like, okay, if you just play out game 3 another 4 times with the Celtics up 2-1, Mavs are like going to be right there in the series. I wouldn't have thought that.
No, I wouldn't have either. And so that, gives us more confidence for how this is going to play out, whether it's 4 games or 5 games or maybe even 6.
Last thing on Porzingis, sorry. I think maybe the one thing, it's not going to matter now in all likelihood, but what you might have said is like, okay, they could go up 3-0 and just have the series be over. They have him under contract for another couple of years. There is a possibility he could hurt himself worse. And so they weren't at the point yet where they really needed him in the series. And so maybe if they got to the point where they did really need him, and particularly if like the backup centers were really struggling, they wanted to see if he could give him 15 minutes in like a game 5, we got tied 2-2. Maybe there was just like, okay, we're not absolutely desperate for him, so why take the risk at this point? Maybe that would have been a thought of like, all right, there's a possibility for him to play. But now, especially with them up 3-0, it wouldn't be wise, I don't think, to bring him back.
And the way they went up 3-0. And so...
Right. They're in control.
And this isn't a natural transition, but pushing buttons has been an important part of the series. And so, going to Xavier Tillman instead of Cornet, instead of Tatum at center, or instead of O'Shea Brissett or something else, like that was a good move by Joe Mazzulla. And I've broadly praised Jason Kidd for doing so. I mean, the managing of the center spot overall, he's done a really good job, and he's managed the bench rotation very well overall. I do not think that happened in game 3, and for a couple different reasons. So one of those was, Dante Exum comes in. I thought he played reasonably well. He only took one shot, which was on one of the strangest possessions of the entire postseason, where Dante Exum just dribbled the ball, kept on dribbling the ball, and then Al Horford basically kind of stunts out because I think thinks there's a pass is coming, and so Dante Exum, I think he held the ball for like 14 seconds and somehow ended up with a dunk on it. It was a ludicrous possession. So he is that. And then that's basically the only stretch that Exum plays the entire game. Hardy gets a brief 4-minute stint. And so instead, Kidd leans more heavily on, and Maxi Kleber only played 8 minutes overall. He leaned more heavily on Josh Green, who I thought had an up and down game, and Tim Hardaway Jr. And Hardaway Jr., part of this is the obvious, where he's out there to make 3-pointers. He takes 3, he misses 3, and that's going to happen from time to time.
And he also took the worst shot of the series as well.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go. Is that
because you said on the live show, you're like, yeah, if I were coaching the Mavs, he would just never see the floor again.
Wouldn't see the floor in the entire series.
They would stretch him before the series.
Because basically it was just he and that wasn't even the play where he tried to drive on Derek White and got swatted in transition. Basically,
that's right, yeah.
And so like Tim Hardaway Jr., you might remember the possession better than I do, because I went into a blind rage and just
it was like 17 on the shot clock. He tried to go 1-on-1 against someone and shot.
I think it was Drew Holiday. It was one of the Celtics' best
defenders. Maybe it was. It might have been like Hauser. I think it actually was Hauser. But Hauser was actually defending really well. And
he forced the contested shot and like didn't generate an advantage. It's like, and of course he's limited on defense and everything else. And so, and the most, and parts of the time you're sympathetic to Kidd, where it's like Luca fouls out with 4:34 to go. And you're like, okay, well, we need a little bit more offense on the floor. And so in that circumstance, you try. But Tim Hardaway Jr. is simultaneously not good enough offensively to solve those problems. And I think you'd like somebody who can actually distribute and make good decisions, which is Dante Exum. But also, that was an opportunity, because remember, the game is super close at this point. When Luka Doncic fouls out, it's 93-90, and that didn't generate free throws. And so you're like, oh, if you could defend a little bit, get some of these shots. And so they defended a little bit worse. I mean, you could argue that Boston was going to regress to the mean anyway. But Hardaway Jr. playing 19 minutes, the Mavericks were outscored by 16 in his 19 minutes, even if that is unfairly maligning Hardaway overall. And then Josh Green, like, he's had some moments overall in these playoffs, but he is not a particularly good defender.
He was good during the run, but he also was really bad before that.
Yeah, but he's not a particularly good defender on the Celtics' best players. Like, he's just a little bit too small. It's one of the shortcomings of the Mavericks. And I mean, they're cobbling it together from the margins here in a way that Boston doesn't have to. But he only made one shot in the game, and it was the 3 during that run, which off a beautiful pass from Luka Doncic, by the way. And he also had, and you articulated this really well in the live show, there was a play where he just straight up never boxed out Sam Hauser, and all Josh Green is out there to do is the little things, like to hustle, to compete, to defend, to make yourself available, hit an open shot. And so you have to do those things really, really well, because otherwise, the Mavericks don't have other guys who can do it, and B, like, what is the point? And so,
yeah, he's not making up for it by like taking a guy one-on-one and scoring on the other end.
And so for Green, like, I thought it was a negative game overall for him. He was on the floor during some of the best stretch, so I didn't think he was particularly. He was the reason that stretch was happening. And so for Kidd, I understand that he's not spoiled for choice here in terms of who fits in really well. The Boston Celtics challenge your rotation in ways that no other team does in the current NBA. But I do think that he made the wrong choices. I'm not going to say those choices are the reason they lost the game in any way, shape, or form, but they didn't help.
Couple more questions here before we. Well, here let's do this first. Any like adjustments? Anything you think might change? Is this just like totally over?
The Mavericks are not going to win this series. I do not know whether the Celtics are going to win in 4 or more than 4. I think they.
Yeah, it seems like it could go one of two ways, particularly with Luca. Just like you could see Luca just like getting so frustrated that he just like gets ejected in Game 4, like Jokic 2021 style. Or you could see him coming out and just being like, "Fuck this! I'm going to just go crazy and get it back to Boston. I'm not getting swept." But I would say more likely than not, Celtics sweep in this one. I mean, they're the better team. Like they're the better team even without Kristaps Porzingis.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people are sort of like, yeah, like how good could this Celtics team be without Porzingis? The fact that they're gonna like go and waltz to a championship largely without him, like doesn't that mean the competition just sucked? And yeah, the competition in the East did just suck. However, previous versions of the Celtics would not have waltzed through that East, even the teams that they were playing, I would say. And then also, like they still added Drew Holiday too. like they were a team that should have made the NBA Finals last year, did make it in 2022, and they added Drew Holiday to the team, even without Porzingis. And Porzingis was like pretty big in the first 2 games as well. So I think like the idea that like the Mavs suck and they're not a worthy champion, I think that's I wouldn't say that about the Celtics. They definitely had a lot of luck, and I sincerely hope that next year's finals will feature the Denver Nuggets against the Boston Celtics, and we can finally see that series. It's felt like the years in the 80s when like Houston made it a couple of times to the finals instead of the Lakers, or a time when the Sixers teams were really good too when they beat Boston, but like that's kind of what it feels like, a little bit of like, man, like I wish like the Denver Nuggets and the Boston Celtics are the 2 best teams in basketball, and the Nuggets ran into a bad matchup. Minnesota certainly earned it. Denver should have won that series. They didn't. They fell apart in the end. They got outplayed. They have some flaws in their roster, but like Nikola Jokic doesn't have this level of difficulty with this Celtics team. Hey, maybe even a healthy Luca Doncic doesn't, but we'll never know that. And certainly he was good enough to get past OKC and get past Minnesota. The one question we had, Danny, was, is this the worst West champion in the last 30 years?
My instinct is no. Because, I mean, this Boston team...
I have a controversial one for you.
Okay.
The 2004 LA Lakers.
Oh, the Malone, that was the Malone team.
With Malone being injured, Gary Payton just not fitting all in the triangle. They're starting like Slava Medvedenko, like washed up Rick Fox. But other than that, yeah, probably. I don't see. I mean, just because the teams that have come out of the West have been amazing, right? Like you're. I think this Dallas team is better than the 2021 Suns. I think they're better than the 2021 Suns. That team also had a lot of injury luck to make it to the.
They did. Yeah.
I mean, they won 2 series against teams that were better than them due to injuries.
Mm-hmm. Is there any argument for Jason Tatum to be dunked on Finals MVP? Not through 3 games. There could be through 4, 5, or 6, but not through 3.
Yeah, I'm always torn on this because of the idea. Ben Taylor talks about this really well. The idea of latent value, right? Where Jason Tatum is still the number 1 option on the team, and he's still their best passer, and so he also probably spaces the floor a little bit better than Brown. Brown has done more as an on-ball defender, I would say, but also like Tatum, as we talked about last time, is a small forward who guards the other team center. That's pretty damn valuable as well, and he's a very good rebounder. But Jaylen Brown can't be doing what he's doing in the series without the presence of Tatum, even if Tatum is not shooting as well. And I do think that Tatum is still their best player, and I think he clearly is their best player over the course of most series. But Brown, he's really improved. He's really matured. This has been some of the best passing I've ever seen from him. We've seen fewer headlong turnovers, fewer dribbling turnovers by him. He's gotten a lot better, and that suddenness that he brings on the offensive end, I also think he's actually a better mid-range scorer than Tatum is too, is really valuable. So I do think the question has gotten a little bit closer, and Brown did kind of just get lost in the ether this year with the acquisitions of Holiday and Porzingis. I think even we were talking about Porzingis as their second best player throughout the course of the season. And I think the playoffs would probably show that that's not the case, even if Porzingis had been healthy. So, I do think it's closer, and Brown will probably be the MVP unless something crazy happens. Tatum goes crazy the next 2 games, they lose one or something like that. If Brown gets hurt, something along those lines, as Brown was the deserving MVP in the East Finals. But I don't think that makes him better than Jason Tatum. I think it just means that he, in this series and in this particular matchup, maybe was more valuable, and he just happened to shoot better and score better as well. He also is just a little better positioned to take advantage against these particular Dallas defenders too, with the way he attacks as opposed to the way Tatum attacks.
We just need to trust Tim Bontemps to drive this ship home.
Yeah, he might not be a voter though, because the finals, everyone's there. Tim Bontemps will always be an Eastern Conference Finals voter. He is the king of that, because he's like Mr. Eastern Conference too. I don't know if he's gonna. I hope he gets a vote because he does a great job. But
I agree.
I trust him more than just about any of the mainstream media people to get it right. Let's see. Anything else we got to talk about here? Any other comments? Let's see. Yeah, Nathan, if the season closes out, we could have gotten a series. Yeah, I mean, maybe it could have been another close game. Dallas wins it in game 4, but I still think Boston, even if they had lost this game, showed throughout this game they're the better team.
I agree.
All right, then. I think that will do it for today. Celtics.
No.
Oh, no, it won't do it for today. Jeez, no. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, we got to talk about Jerry West.
Yeah, and I think the way that I want to discuss Jerry West passing, and it's so unfortunate that we're doing this with another giant within our sport so quickly after the passing of Bill Walton, is I was thinking about it a lot today, and I've thought about it before, that to my eyes, and I'm not the basketball historian that many are, including many who listen to this podcast, but to my eye, Jerry West has the greatest NBA career of any human being ever. And that is factoring in player, coach, executive, because he, his coaching career was very short, but the amount of excellence that he produced during that time is, and to do it in different facets of the game, it's beyond anyone else.
He was the best, or close to the best, at what he did in basketball, regardless of what that was, for a 45-year period, and then was still doing it at a high level for another 15 after that. That's truly incredible.
And we've seen other, we've seen people be successful in multiple branches, but they're not similar things. Being able to be a Hall of Fame player, one of the greatest ever, the 3rd greatest shooting guard ever by most accounting, and then to be one of, if not the best executives in NBA history. Those are two completely different tasks. He was a short-lived 3-year but successful coach. It's truly incredible what Jerry West was able to accomplish. And then, I mean, like another part of it for me that's just so amazing. I mean, of course, go through his unbelievable success as a player. Then he is briefly the coach of the Lakers from 76 to 79. Then eventually becomes the general manager, builds the Showtime Lakers, and then is still there to build the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. Then leaves for Memphis. And I think that part of what makes Jerry West such an incredible story to me in the NBA is that, like, of course, that enough, Hall of Famer in two facets just with that. But like those Grizzlies teams, like he built some really good Grizzlies teams, and then he was an essential voice in the room.
Yeah, they were a 50-win team that built out of nothing by him, pretty much.
Built out of nothing by him, and then he was an essential voice in the room for the Warriors as they built what became a dynasty for them. And he was, by most accounts, an important voice for the Warriors not trading Klay Thompson for Kevin Love, a move that was disagreed with by at least one of these two podcast hosts.
No, me too. Yeah,
to my chagrin. And that was, of course, essential for their championships. And then, that he ends up leaving the Warriors and going to the Clippers, and he has an integral role in assembling what probably is not going to be a champion, but another great collection of talent that kind of came out of the ether there. And like it's jaw-dropping just what he was able to accomplish in his career.
No, it's really insane. And when you read some of the accounts about him personally, David Aldridge wrote a wonderful piece that I recommend. But it seemed like he had this unique combination of personal gifts that both enabled him to be incredibly successful as a player and as an executive. I mean, number one is just being like an unbelievable competitor, but also not someone who was arrogant in the way that many stars are. He had humility about him. He was able to really connect with people as an executive. He's combing the desert for prospects in the gym. He was never too good for any aspect of the job as a player or as a coach or an executive. And so he has that level of humility, but he also has an insane level of competitiveness and working hard. And then, and also, frankly, like an insecurity. Like that seemed like, I mean, reading his autobiography is like an unbelievable read as well. Like one of the best autobiographies in the sports field ever written, I would say. And then the other thing though, is he was still like enough of like a cynical motherfucker too, right? Like he could like Joe Mazzulla had a, not even necessarily cynical, but like he cynical in the sense that every talent evaluator has to be this way, right? He has to be able to look at like a Kevin Love and be like, yeah, you know what? Nah, it's not going to work. He's going to be too slow. Let's hold on to Klay Thompson instead, right? Like there's just, you can't be a good talent evaluator if you're just rah-rahing everyone. Like, you have to be a skeptic, but he was able to maintain that. Whereas a lot of people that, you would probably agree with this, right? Like people we talk to work in the NBA, like a lot of them are like pretty jaded, right? Like Jerry West never got to that point, but he was able to apply that level of analysis to players to actually know who's going to be good. And then he also, the idea of like being able to provide some tough love, like Joe Mazzulla talked about that when he was at West Virginia. He basically told him he was like screwing up his life and he needed to do better. And Joe said that always really sat with him a lot. So that's one thing that I think, just that combination of qualities. And so I just want to kind of go through the timeline here for him and just his career to just remember it. Of course, they lose by a point to Cal in 1959 in the NCAA final. And then 1960s on the Olympic team that in Rome that has actually been inducted separately, in addition to having a number of Hall of Famers on it as well. He's a rookie for the Lakers. Early on in LA, he doesn't really ramp up until year 3, and then by 1962, he's a superstar. He's probably, certainly by 63, the best player on the Lakers. As a player, he was one of the most athletic guards of his time. Really long arms, like a 6'9" wingspan. It was, I think, what it was reported as, and he was kind of in the 6'3" range height wise, but kind of had that Dwayne Wade sort of long arms. He could block some shots, get some steals. He was strong, one of the more athletic guards at the time. And the way his game worked, if you haven't seen the film, is he just had one of the quickest triggers in the league, because you couldn't really like cross over, break guys' ankles at that time. So you kind of had to just sort of like dribble back and forth and then just like get your shot off quickly just by like getting the guy leaning the wrong way. And he could do that. He was a really good finisher as well. He improved his game to go left, which he wasn't great at early in his career, and became, probably right up there with Oscar Robertson as like the two best offensive players before Magic and Bird. And when Ben Taylor also, I highly recommend his Back Picks Top 40 series. You want to learn more about his game. I went back and looked at that today. There's good film from that too. But yeah, great statistical footprint. Loses a ton of times in the finals to the Celtics. Finally breaks through in 72 with the 69-13 team. They beat the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Bucks, and then he had another finals appearance the following year. They couldn't get it done, and so he only wins one finals, but he was just one of the most universally respected people. Only player from a losing team to ever win finals MVP, which I think it was the first year they ever did it, right? It was 1969.
Yeah.
I want to say.
Briefly before we move out of his playing career, I hadn't thought about this because it's not the era that I like knew basketball as well. He was an all-star in the year he retired. He did deal with a groin injury that year. And so we talked on the podcast or on the live show today about players who could have maybe still played in a final series when they retired. Who knows? Maybe he could have.
Yeah, he did have a few more injuries than was optimal, and more than a lot of guys had early. Like he definitely missed some playoffs with injury, like 1967, for example, and rarely was able to play a full season. Though that's part of why you can see how valuable he was due to the way the team performed in games that he didn't play, in a way that would be tough with Bill Russell, because Bill Russell played 45 minutes a game and almost never missed games. But so I think his playing career is amazing. He still is right in that top 20. I would say, even though more modern players are coming in, like the best offensive player in the first 30 years of the NBA is probably going to be a top 20 player. I would say there's the fact that he also got better in the playoffs, which very, very few players have done. More efficient and higher scoring is remarkable. And then some of the teams that he built. When did he become the Lakers?
1982.
Yeah, so he made some huge moves for that first team. Like they already had Worthy at that point, but 1983 trades away Norm Nixon. That makes Magic the full-time point guard, gets Byron Scott in that trade, continues to just add to some other guys around Magic, signs Sam Perkins, keeps them relevant all the way until Magic has to retire the first time. And then one of his best jobs, maybe his best job, was rebuilding from the Magic team. Worthy retires right after that. And I think they only had, I want to say, 2 years out of the playoffs. Maybe, no, it was only 1 year out of the playoffs, because they actually almost beat the Suns, the number one seed. They went up 2-0 on the road against the Suns in 93 and almost beat them as the 8th seed. And then they missed the playoffs in 94. That's the ill-fated Magic Johnson coaching at the end of the year. And then they're right back. He gets Nick Van Exel, second round in the draft, one of the best second-round picks ever, particularly at that time. There were never good second-round picks. Finds Cedric Ceballos off the scrap heap, rebuilds around Divac. They get Eldon Campbell, who's another great late draft pick. Eddie Jones is another great draft pick. And all of a sudden, they're right back, vying for a home court advantage seed in the West. And that was the team that was good enough to get Shaq to come there. And then, of course, there's the machinations with him and Arntel to get Kobe Bryant to drop in the draft and then do the trade of Divac for Kobe Bryant. And that was also amazing as well. Builds that next team, does the falling out with the Buss family, and Phil Jackson goes to Memphis, and then obviously ends up in Golden State after that as well as a consultant. So I mean, it was just the number of teams that he built was absolutely insane. And also just another one of these guys who, in addition to Bill Walton, everyone who talked to him thought that he was just eminently fair, maybe tough at times, but totally fair, amazing to deal with, never big timed anyone. Just an absolute legend and well worthy of being the logo of the NBA to me.
Absolutely.